Super excited to host the next speaker who is head of design and head of driver experience for a small little company called Uber. It's an exciting opportunity to actually hear from global practitioners. There you go, Arjun. We can see you. And I don't know if that's your normal look or if that's your COVID look, but it looks great. For those who have not seen Arjun's LinkedIn profile, he is an amazing practitioner with a combination of strong strategy, vision, but also hands-on execution. He's got the reputation for designing multiple products. He's responsible for a lot of innovation that has happened in Uber, but even before that, at Salesforce, the way he has designed a lot of that interface is still being used by millions of people, very effectively on all form factors, whether it's mobile, whether it's tablet, whether it's a web, and so on and so forth. He started, in fact, his career as a UX designer in MicroStrategy. So welcome, Arjun. If you can say a quick hello, we can check whether we can hear you as well.
Cool. Thanks for the introduction, Pinkesh. This is my COVID look, which has become my new normal look now.
Excellent. Hey, so I couldn't help but notice that you've worked in Shanghai, in Detroit. Obviously, it looks like you grew up in Mumbai, and you probably did your education there. You've also worked in Brazil and now in San Francisco with Uber. Here's a quick thought as you kind of get set up to share your title talk on designing as an entrepreneur. But the quick question I have, now that you have that global experience, do you think there is a local context to designing things when your product is truly global?
Absolutely. I think thinking about the local environment, the local culture, the geographical differences, the nuances that come are extremely important. And that's why I oftentimes see the local competitors trump and beat the global players. They just understand the cultural nuances better. So it's extremely important. Simple answer is yes.
Awesome. Well, all yours. So Arjun, feel free to get started.
Cool, absolutely. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, great. Hi, folks. Thank you, Product Leadership Conference. Thank you, Pinkesh. Thanks, everyone, for giving me the opportunity to speak with you and share some of my stories with you today. I'm going to start with this image. I'm just ponder over this image, what this image means to you for a couple seconds. To me, this is where I want to be. This is my destination. It's my nirvana. I think we all have some kind of an end state where we want our product to be, where we want ourselves to be, where we want our companies to be. And, very often you even see a path to getting there. Unfortunately, life comes in the way. Reality looks very different, right? You're hanging on to like the closest branch, trying to find kind of the next branch, and you're just jumping from one branch to the other. This is essentially what my life was, and kind of is today as well. I have, however, learned some tactical steps of how you can get to that spot. I don't think I've learned everything for sure, but I've learned some steps that I wanted to share with you. Pinkesh spoke a little bit about my journey. I'll give you some more context. I'm currently leading the driver design team at Uber. It's an app millions of drivers use to make a living. Before Uber, as Pinkesh mentioned, I was at Salesforce. But my journey actually started as a computer engineer in India. I didn't know the world of design. I'd even say I was intimidated by it. I wasn't a natural artist. I had studied engineering. I'd even founded a company, raised a few $1 million. So I'd worked as an entrepreneur. And And then when I landed a job at the Salesforces and Ubers, I almost had an imposter syndrome. There was a little bit of like a fear of the unknown. I was not sure if I was like up to the task. Over the last 10 years, though, I learned that having a very diverse perspective, I think Pinkesh touched upon this a little bit, having the diverse perspective of working in different geographies, also bringing in your engineering background, bringing in your entrepreneurship background, wearing all the different hats, I realized it actually sets you up as a successful designer. One of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite designers, he was one of the founders of Jawbone, a Swedish designer. It says, designers are uniquely suited at solving problems on multiple dimensions without losing the sight of the big opportunity to wow the customer. I think the key words here are the multiple dimensions. One of the companies that does this phenomenally well, I'm sure all of you have heard of this company and seen some of their products, is Tesla. Now, Tesla is one of my favorite examples for how they solve the design problem from all the angles, right from what the company stands for, the storytelling, right? The storytelling kind of bleeds into the design. This company is an electric company. The design of their charging station, the simplicity of it, the design of the interior of the car, they even rethought that. They rethink everything from ground up. They didn't want to put so many knobs and controls, the air conditioners to distract an already distracted driver. They just put a simple interface there that kind of changes based on the context of the driving state. They took out everything else. They questioned the norms. Why do things have to be the way they were? They even redesigned the key. They were like, why does it have to be like a clunky thing that I need to get into the car? Why can't it just like slip into my purse or my wallet, just like the rest of my credit cards? They redesigned the entire sales and marketing and pricing and buying strategy. There were no showrooms for Tesla when they started off. I think the phenomenal thing about redesigning sales and pricing was that they have one fixed price. One of the most annoying things about buying a car is you have to worry about negotiating the right price, right? You feel bad if you haven't got the right price. Tesla just kept it simple. It's like, there's one price. Everyone pays that same price. So here's an example of a company that rethought everything. They looked at all the aspects and all the angles of the design. It wasn't just artistic design. It was thinking about engineering. It was thinking about sales. It was thinking about marketing. It was thinking about physical designs. And that's where kind of most of this talk is about. How do you design like a researcher? How do you design like a marketer, storyteller? How do you design like a scientist sometimes? How do you design like an engineer? And how does wearing all those different hats set your product up for success? I'll start up with the research use case. It's very important to put on your research hat right at the starting line. You gotta live and breathe the user's problems. You need to realize you're eventually actually fixing a user problem. Here's an example of what we do at Uber. We sit into the driver's car. We take fellow rides with them. And one thing that we learned in some of our research trips, Pinkesh brought up Brazil. I was there for some time. We realized that the drivers are communicating to coordinate the trips a lot. Now that seems like a very simple problem to solve, right? Right now, what they were doing in the past was, we thought Uber was super magical, right? You tap a button, you get a ride, but actually it required a lot of coordination between the rider and driver. They were calling each other, they were texting each other, their phone numbers were being shared, which was not safe as well. And we were like, you know what? The solution kind of is simple. Let's just build a chat interface within the Uber app so that you don't have to like go from one app to the other, get distracted. You don't have to pay the cost of the SMS. You don't have to share your phone number. And I think that's where some of the designers and some of the product people like stop. But what the truth is that the first solution that comes to mind is actually oftentimes the most complex one. And you got to like peel the layers of the onion and constantly ask your users for the feedback to improve further. What we got as feedback is like, you know what, this is still actually very cumbersome. I'm driving, I have to like stop somewhere, I have to type the message and so forth. So we started realizing, okay, you know, there's only X number of things that a driver and rider share in the context of an Uber trip. Why not add canned messages? The ones that you see at the bottom here. You're like, cool, that was an improvement. But then drivers still weren't happy. They were like, oh, you know what? I missed a turn. I didn't know I had to take a right turn. I had to leave my navigation screen while driving and while interacting with the rider. So you're like, okay, cool. That's great feedback. What if you don't have to get out of the context at all? We'll show you your canned messages right there. You can still see your turn. You can still see your navigation. The drivers were still not happy. They were like, you know what? I still have to look at my phone, right? I still have to take my hands off the wheel. And then we introduced text to speech, where we'll read out the message, and voice recognition, where you can respond with just your voice. Now, this is not done yet, right? We still can keep improving, but this is an example of how the first solution, though it's kind of solved a problem, it was still complicated, and we had to constantly work to improve it. I think the lesson here is users live the problem. They are smart. You need to put your research hat and understand what is it that they want, and how do you bring that to them. The next area is designing as a storyteller, designing as a marketer. What does storytelling and marketing teach you about design? You saw a lot of what Tesla did in the previous example. One of my best learnings I had this was at my job at Salesforce. One of the things that our CEO at that point, who I believed was one of the best storytellers, kept reinforcing that more is not equal to better. Salesforce had tons of product. It's super complicated product out there. There's so much that they do. They do sales, service, marketing, analytics. How do you simplify this for the user? One of the smart things the CEO did was every year there was a conference that Salesforce had, which was Dreamforce. And he focused on one theme. Imagine trying to rally the entire company on one theme. One of the years when I was there, the theme was Einstein AI. And you see this, Einstein made its way into this infographic as well. It's trying to simplify the problem. It's trying to simplify what the value proposition is. They had Einstein everywhere. They had Einstein in their marketing and their storytelling. There was even an AR version of an Einstein in the keynote speech that the CEO was giving. And then we as designers were learning about how to propagate that simplicity, that one single focus into the product experience as well. How do you use that simplicity in storytelling to simplify your product experience? I think there is this conception out there like more features equals to better. This was a lesson for me that Apple does phenomenally well. When Apple released the iPad, Steve Jobs showed it, and then they got a lot of negative reviews. They're like, oh, this iPad doesn't have a keyboard. This iPad doesn't have XYZ that the notebooks that Google and Microsoft were providing that time had. But Steve Jobs was focusing on 2 or 3 things. As opposed to trying to do everything mediocre, he was doing 2 or 3 things great. And that's the lesson you learn from storytelling and from marketing that you can bring into your design. The next one is designing as a scientist. This is a really interesting one. One thing that I didn't know about that I learned at Uber is, actually, even before I go to this slide, let me ask you a question. What happens when there's a difference of opinion in the design directions that your designers are proposing? Imagine there's a team, there's a room, there's a designer there, engineer there, PM there, there's an executive there, and everyone has like a different opinion of how the product should be designed. Who wins the argument there? Usually the senior most person in the room, right? It's simple. The senior most person in the room wins the argument. What if data won the argument? What if your users won the argument? And I think that's the crux of how do you scientifically, systematically use data to improve your designs. A new learning for me when I joined Uber was everything that we built was rolled out as an experiment. We had a hypothesis of what problem it was solving. We always had a control. The control did not see the new experience. And then we had multiple variations of what the new experience looked like. We let the experiment run for some time, and then only after we saw the results, did we roll something out? There were oftentimes, and this is oftentimes heartbreaking, right? Because sometimes designers get too attached to their solution. I may be too attached to solution A. Another member of my team may be too attached to solution B. And for all we know, the control may have won and realize that, you know what, it was not worth spending too much time on this new feature at all. And you fail fast. Experimentation and using data is like a very systematic, methodical, scientific way to design the right products. Another way to use science and data is understanding patterns. One of the things that we learned at Uber is, think of the scenario, I'm sure some of you may have been in it. You want to go from point A to point B. Imagine you want to go to the airport from your home and you don't want to take an Uber pool. The Uber pool is cheaper, but you don't want to take it because you don't want to stop at multiple stops. You're just nervous it's going to take your time. What we saw in data is there were oftentimes scenarios where there was an Uber pool next to you. And you would be the last person in the pool and the first person out. So you wouldn't really have to stop at all. You would just be getting into a shared car. So it was almost the experience of an Uber X at the price of the Uber pool. The person who's already sitting in the car would get dropped off after you. So you would almost get a straight route to your destination. And we built this feature learning from this data where when you requested an Uber X, we kind of showcased a Uber pool option to you, saying that, hey, you know what, you'll get a non-stop shared ride. And there are oftentimes scenarios where you'll even get there faster because the car is just closer to you. You'll have to pay less. And you're reducing carbon emissions on the road. So it's understanding data, understanding patterns that help you design the right solution. It's not as much about how this UI looks like. It is obviously important, but it's understanding the right context. It's understanding the right scenarios. It's understanding patterns from this data in order to make this possible. I've never worked at Netflix, but I know Netflix takes experimentation at a whole new level. They are testing thousands of variations. And not only that, they're experimenting on everything. They experiment, from what I have heard, even on the cover of what you see, the cover of these styles. If you're a violent person, it looks like they feel I'm a violent person. They have a lot of dark images here. They even experiment and use data to stitch together the trailer for you. You will see a different trailer than another family member, depending on what they think you like. Finally, I'll go to design as an engineer. Sometimes the best designs sprout out from the engineering team, right? It's from engineering thinking. It's from engineering possibilities. Safety has always been a key focus for Uber. And one of the things that we learned from putting our engineering hats on is that it is possible to detect through signals if your car is taking a detour. And how do we contextually try to help you there? A different scenario from that is it's also possible to detect if there's a crash. And how do we use the right context to showcase you the best experience at that time? I think one of the most important things to take out of a lot of this is everyone's holding one piece of the puzzle. Designer is holding one piece of the puzzle. And only when you think as an engineer, as a marketer, as a storyteller, essentially as an entrepreneur, can you bring all those pieces together. You bring all those jigsaw pieces together and put together a very holistic puzzle. I'll leave with this one last quote I feel that encapsulates this very well from the best designer, arguably the best designer the world has ever seen. Steve Jobs says, "Design is a funny word. Some people think design means how it looks, but of course, if you dig deeper, it's really how it works." All right, that's my time, guys. Thank you.
Hey, that was fantastic, Arjun, and a very insightful journey into, you kind of Ubered us very seamlessly through a bunch of case studies to kind of make the point. And I couldn't help notice one other comment you made, and I wanted to ask the opening question that I think Raj and Srini also from the audience have asked, similar to that. You said, you went from an engineer to become a designer, and that's a fantastic, transition and a journey. Is there a set of things that you would want to share? Perhaps three things that you believe um, many others who may want to traverse that path and make that transition like you did, that you think could help them based on your experience of having done that.
I'm sorry, Pinkesh, I missed a part of the question. Could you repeat that one more time?
Is there three things that you would like to share as a bunch of other engineers like you who may want to transition into becoming a designer, right? And not just engineers, but it could be program managers, project managers, right? What are the insights that you can share that can help them with the lessons learned in your own path?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I don't know if there are three per se. Um, I I think one of the most important things about why I put this talk together as well is I too had a little bit of that imposter syndrome, like I mentioned. One of the things that I learned after even interviewing hundreds of designers in each of these companies, I learned that the best designers actually have a very interdisciplinary background. We had designers from an anthropology background, we had designers from an architecture background, we had designers obviously from engineering, and I feel that's what actually sets them up for success, because they have the ability to think about all of the different perspectives, their life experiences, and bring that to the table when designing a solution. And it's super important for designers to be that glue. Designers are the ones who are taking in like the demands from the executives or whoever it may be, and then putting pen on paper and visualizing what that looks like. So it's very important for them to be able to understand all of these perspectives around the company. Um, and I would almost say that you are better set up for success if you have a different background.
Interesting. So I'm going to pick a few questions in interest of time. So Hitesh Jain, his question is, how do you conclude or come to the conclusion that there is no need for customer feedback column in your product?
I almost think of this as a trick question. Um, I, I, I don't think there, I'll give a very ideological answer first, and then I'll give a practical answer. The ideological answer is that you should never feel that there is no need for more customer feedback. The day you stop learning as a designer, as a product leader, is the day someone else will come in and disrupt you. A practical answer is fair, right? You only have X amount of resources, you have few researchers, and you need to allocate them to the most important things. I think practically the way to think about it is, if you start seeing the law of diminishing returns, right? You can get to like 99% of the solution, let's say in 10 months. To get to the 100% solution, it'll take you another 2 years. And that's where you see the law of diminishing returns.
Mm.
So obviously, I think the previous speaker shared as well, tracking metrics is phenomenally important. And once you see the law of diminishing returns on them is when you realize that.
Is there a slightly different take to the question, perhaps? But is there a way for you to take feedback without taking feedback? Meaning, can you infer things and hence eliminate the need? Have you ever seen or have you encountered that type of opportunity or system in Uber or other places that you've worked, that you think that you already kind of know based on what the user is struggling, doing, not doing, and so you already have the feedback without taking feedback? Do you think that's a good idea?
Yes, I think you are still taking feedback. You're just taking feedback in different forms. And that could be through data, through funnel analysis of where users are dropping off, what screens um, are they shutting the app on,
Mhm.
what screens are dead ends for them. Um, and that is actually implicit feedback that you are getting from users. It's just not qualitative. um, Oftentimes you start with that feedback. You start
Mhm.
with that feedback and then you realize that, hey, there's an anomaly in this one particular area. Now let me go qualitative on that. And then you go
Mhm.
deeper into asking users like, hey, you know what, this is what I've seen uh, this group do. Why is it that this is happening? And you get kind of the underneath the data as to like why this is happening and how you can go about it. So overall, I do believe that you're always taking in feedback. It could be quantitative, qualitative, through patterns and so forth.
Mhm.
um, yeah. Sorry, I don't know if I answered your question.
No, it was just a curiosity that a lot of people in the community have always asked, that, just like you can do market research without asking the explicit question in the product management space, can you take, design feedback, by perhaps telemetry or putting signals or putting analytics, to understand what the customer is doing. And that's also a form of feedback without explicitly asking for it. Yeah.
Yep.
Here's another question from Jagrati Bhatia. And I think her question is more around how do you strategize uh, to kind of see how many good number of A/B tests can you possibly do in a limited period of time? So that you know that you have the best design at the end. Any best practices or insights that you can share on number in terms of the A/B test, or even duration of how long? How long do you know before you know this is good enough in your view?
So this is a really good question. I think it gets to the crux of experimentation. Is actually very difficult. You need to build a really strong experimentation framework. Now, what I mean by that is the length is not as important as the amount of data points you need. So depending on how many users this experiment is going out to, the length might change. If you are the luxury of like an Uber, who does have this large scale, it is significantly easier, or it is significantly faster to get results.
Mm.
So you need to reach statistical significance. Um, and the other complicated thing about experimentation is also you need to make sure the experiment is pure. You need to make sure the control and the two treatments are actually not having any other external factors that interfere with the experiment.
Mm.
um, Sometimes you might see one group, like it's very tough to run 3 or 4 or maybe 10 multiple experiments together, because a user might behave one way or the other, not just because of your treatment or your experiment. It might be another experiment that's interfering with yours. um, so the experimentation framework is super important. I'll be very candid, I'm not an expert on creating that experimentation framework. There are phenomenal data scientists out there who do that, and they might be better positioned to answer some of the details here. But yeah, all I'll say is like you have to be careful about experimentation to do it
Mm.
right.
Mm. Good point. Good point. I'm getting signals from the host that we are running out of time, but I do want to acknowledge. I think Suruchika had a good question on the whole graphics design, visual design, and sometimes when you don't have those skills, how do you compensate for that? Monica had a good questions around something about Salesforce. Ianu had a good question around Uber for different countries. But if I have to pick one in interest of time, I'm going to pick the last one from Krishagi Saini. And her question is, how do you divide the time and kind of switch wearing that hat that you talked about between the research, the storyteller, the scientist, and the engineer when you're designing for the product? Any guidance now that you've kind of laid out that framework for the audience? Any guidance on how do you divide the time up, and what percentage, if there is a prescriptive way to tell and answer that?
It is very dependent from product to product, but since the question asks for a prescriptive way, I'll try and do that. if I had to, if I had to create a generalized framework, though which may not work for all products, I would say if you first wear the research hat, because you're first kind of you're solving a problem. You need to understand what that problem is. You need to understand why users are facing that problem. Then you go with your graphic design hat and you actually come up with a solution that may work. Then you wear your engineering hat to make sure what you are designing can be brought to life, and negotiate and work with that engineering hat on as to like what is the best way to put that out there. And then you wear the scientist hat to see the efficacy of your designs, to understand and be very methodical and less emotional about your designs as to are they really solving the problems, and how do you learn and iterate and get better.
That's a very good point, and it's actually just to kind of wrap up the session as well on that high note. We've seen this as a theme, Arjun, across this whole cross-functional, specialist, right? We use this word a lot. I think a lot of management gurus are saying that, look, that's the way of building your career as well. You may be a designer, but you really need to play these other roles as well, or at least have the acumen for it. You may be a product manager, but you still need to have a design, sense and a data science sense, and so on and so forth, right? You may be an engineer, but you still need to understand enough product management and enough design. So I'm glad you brought that up, and I think we've seen that across the theme. In fact, in order to support that, there has been a separate design festival, data science festival, product festival to kind of bring the same up. So while the poll is up, certainly look forward to the feedback from all of you. I just wanted to, on behalf of the entire volunteers for the festival, thanks a lot, Arjun. Truly appreciate it. Here's a little virtual set of appreciation. Although I do promise we'll take you out for a good Jamba Juice next time. I'm in Cupertino, and look forward to meeting you as well. This
Absolutely,
is
looking forward.
your QR code will take you to your own personal page as you enter the Hall of Fame on the Institute, and truly appreciate your time, your insights, and paying it forward for the community. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Pinkesh and the team.